When some of you online are listening, we're glad to have you with us. Glad to know that you are listening to the Word and enjoying knowing more about the Lord. That's what we're wanting every day, to know more about the Lord, because His coming is soon. It could be any day. If it's not, then we'll wait for Him. But it could be any day. And I was thinking this morning, I was just praising the Lord for the pastor that I had as I was growing up. I know I've mentioned this to you folks here before, but it was a lady pastor, and she placed in the hearts of everyone in her congregation that would receive it at all, the fact that Jesus was coming. His coming could be any day, and we needed to watch for His coming, wait for His coming, and give our lives to Him. That was instilled in me as a child and in all my family. And I thank the Lord for that, because I still believe that strongly. That's been a long time ago, but He still hasn't come. But He still could come any day, and I pray that He will make me ready. Because I can't make me ready for His coming. There's no way that I could. But if we will ask Him, and if we will just give our lives to Him, He will work in us whatever is needed. He's promised that. Is He a God that keeps His promises? Amen. He certainly is. And so He will make us ready for His coming. And what if it was today? What if this afternoon? He would come this afternoon. How would we feel? And you know, I was talking to my sister just the other day on the phone, and she was talking about the same thing, and she reminded me of a song that we used to sing when I was growing up, and it was about the coming of the Lord. It says, "Have your eyes caught the vision? Has your heart felt the thrill? To the call of our bridegroom, do you answer, I will? 'Tis the conflict of the ages, taught by prophets and by sages, is upon us today." Oh, wow. The conflict of the nations, and the Bible talks about that. It's upon us today more than it ever has been before in my life, and more than ever, I believe. It's upon us. He could come. There's nothing else in the scriptures that need to be fulfilled before His coming. And so let's ask Him to make us ready and look for His coming. A wonderful hope that we have. So going to 1 Samuel chapter 26, we're going to go ahead and take chapters 26 and 27 this morning, because 27 is a very short chapter, and see what the Lord has for us. So chapter 26, verse 1, "And the Ziphites came unto Saul to Gibeah, saying, Doth not David hide himself in the hill of Hachilah, which is before Jeshimon? Then Saul arose and went down to the wilderness of Ziph, having there 3,000 chosen men of Israel with him, to seek David in the wilderness of Ziph." Now, this is just continuing the story that we've been reading about David. But so many people were helping Saul out. Yeah. Why do you think that was? David was well known.
They were accustomed to him? Would that be
accustomed to Saul? I don't know. Someone else have a thought?
They might have thought he was stronger, he was going to win, because this was one little man running with 400, and Saul had the strength behind him, so they wanted to play up to the one who was going to win.
And that's being accustomed to him.
Play up to, I like that word that you used, because I think that had a lot to do with it. They were wanting to please whoever was the top guy, and Saul was at that time. And so for any of them to know where David was, they knew Saul was looking for him. And so they wanted to get on the good side of Saul.
Make them look good in his eyes.
Make them look good in his eyes, yes. Who's behind all of that?
The devil.
Satan.
The devil is behind all of that.
Amen.
He's behind anything that's going against what God is wanting to do. The devil does everything he can to stop it. So we need to be aware of that and stand fast for the Lord. So anyway, they were telling Saul right where he could find David. Saul had been looking for David for a long time. Saul was jealous of David. This is behind what he was doing. He was jealous. He knew that David was strong. David had killed that giant, Goliath, and David was, so many people were looking to David, and he knew all of that, and he was jealous of David, so he wanted to get rid of David. Well, the Lord had also anointed David to be king. When the Lord, it was obvious that Saul wasn't going to obey God and yield to him. Well, then God had anointed David to be king. But God anointed David a long time before he allowed him to be the king. Does that mean that God was not doing right? God is always doing right. He knows exactly what to do and when to do it. And that's what he was doing. And so it just wasn't God's timing yet for David. How often have we asked God to do something and he doesn't answer right away, and so we think, oh, well, maybe didn't want to. Maybe we shouldn't have asked that. Maybe we should do something ourselves to cause this to come to pass. Maybe.
And how many times have we stepped out when we shouldn't have?
That's right. So many times we've stepped out to help God out when we shouldn't have. We should have been patient and waited. And so David was being patient here, but Saul was
That's why God is
seeking
God
him.
and we are not.
That's right. That's why God is God. But anyway, these people from Ziph told Saul right where to go to find David. So Saul runs over there. But how many men did Saul take with him?
3,000.
Why would he take 3,000? And these were his great chosen men, warriors, to go get one man.
He's a coward and he's up against God.
He's a coward and he's up against God, whether he really realized that or not. I don't know if he really realized
Probably
that
not.
at this point. But
Well, and you realize that Saul knew what kind of a warrior David was. He'd already seen him in action.
yes,
He
he
wasn't
knew.
just taking no chances.
He wasn't. He knew what kind of a warrior God David was. If David could kill one man, the giant Goliath, well, I guess that's why Saul thought he needed to take 3,000 of his chosen men,
Coward.
of his warriors. Anyway, verse 3, and Saul pitched in the hill of Hachilah, which was before Jeshimon, by the way. But David abode in the wilderness, and he saw that Saul came after him into the wilderness. So David had to go, he was running away from Saul, and he had to go into the wilderness. Left his home, left his friends. Some men went with him. In fact, there were about 4,000 that finally ended up going with him. But left his family. David had to it was a hard place for David to go to, and to run around in the wilderness trying to hide from Saul.
Why didn't he ask the Lord?
He may have asked the Lord, but still the Lord probably didn't tell him just exactly where to go and what to do. If he did, I think it would have told us in the Bible. But this was a hard time for David, and the Lord allowed it. This is what we have to realize.
Yes.
The Lord allows hard times in our lives because he's working in us. He is perfecting us. He is doing what we need to teach us what we need to learn.
So if the Lord doesn't say something to us, there's a reason.
That's right. If the Lord doesn't answer us and say something specifically, he has a reason, and he wants us to learn to continue to trust him, continue to wait on him and trust him. And so David was learning that. He said in verse 4, David therefore sent out spies and understood that Saul was come in very deed. He had probably heard that Saul was looking for him, and so, but he wasn't sure, so he sent out spies to find out for sure. Well, he found out for sure Saul was looking for him. Verse 5, and David arose and came to the place where Saul had pitched, and David beheld the place where Saul lay, and Abner the son of Ner, the captain of his host, and Saul lay in the trench, and the people pitched round about him. So he found out right where Saul was. It wasn't very far away from David. And he saw where Saul was laying there, was lying there. And so I'm sure he was asking the Lord what to do. Now, how the Lord was answering, we're not told. But anyway, in verse 6, then answered David and said to Ahimelech the Hittite and to Abishai the son of Zeruiah, brother to Joab. Now, I read one commentary that said that Abishai was a nephew of David's that was there with him. But he saw these men and he said, who will go down with me to Saul in the camp? And Abishai said, I will go down with thee. So he found out where Saul was. It wasn't very far from him. So he says, okay, who will go with me? His nephew says, I will go with you. Verse 7, so David and Abishai came to the people by night, and beheld Saul lay sleeping within the trench, and his spear stuck in the ground at his bolster. His bolster there was like a headpiece that his head was on. But Abner and the people lay round about him. So Abner was his main one that was supposed to be with him, with Saul, taking care of him, making sure everything was okay, and he was his main warrior. But they were sleeping. They had been looking for David, and they hadn't found him yet, so they went to this place, and all of them just lay down and went to sleep. But he had a spear right by his head, so in case he heard anything, in case he saw David in any way, he could get up and had his spear with him, he could go after him. And notice he had his spear, and on down it says he had water, the two things he needed, his spear and water. Then said, verse 8, then said Abishai to David, God has delivered thine enemy into thine hand this day. Now therefore let me smite him, I pray thee, with the spear even to the earth at once, and I will not smite him to the second time. So Abishai was just excited here. He had gone with David to help him, and they saw Saul asleep, and he said, let me go and I'll just stick my spear into him and kill him right here. God has allowed you to have him at this place. God is in this because they're asleep, and I'll sneak up and I'll kill him before they know what's going on. Didn't that look like God was in that?
Yep.
Looked like it.
Circumstance.
Well, why didn't David say, yes, go ahead?
Because he said no.
He said no. He said in verse 9, David said to Abishai, destroy him not, for who can stretch forth his hand against the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? So he knew that, yeah, Saul could. But David knew that God had anointed Saul, which he did, to be king over Israel. And as king of Israel, until God took him out of being king, David felt that he needed to honor him as king. and killing him was not honoring him. So David was very wise. I believe the reason he was is because he was close to God.
Yes.
He had spent time with God. He knew what God's ways were, and he knew that that would have been taking things into his own hand, and he knew he shouldn't be doing that. Remember, he had the opportunity once before, not too long before this, to kill Saul.
And
But-
I'd have said, remember what happened? You should have let me live.
Yes. David could have done a lot of reasoning in his mind as to why it was okay to go ahead and kill Saul here. Reasoning the fact that God has allowed it again, allowed Saul again to be in this area. So it is probably from God that he could go ahead and kill him.
But truth is truth.
Yeah, and that
And truth
overrules.
says you don't touch God's anointed.
Yes, and David realized that.
Plus, that was such a witness for David's men to see and Saul's
Oh,
men to see.
Oh, it was.
That's why
was.
Abigail could say, no evil has been found in you.
Yes, that's right. It was a real witness. David was doing just as God would want him to do. And so God was pleased and David was protected. Verse 10, David said furthermore, as the Lord liveth, the Lord shall smite him, or his day shall come to die, or he shall descend into battle and perish. The Lord forbid that I should stretch forth mine hand against the Lord's anointed. But I pray thee, take now the spear that is at his bolster and the cruse of water, and let us go. But notice that, the Lord forbid that I should stretch forth mine hand against the Lord's anointed. Are all Christians of the church anointed by God today? We are.
Yeah, I'd have said, oh, come on.
And I didn't look up a scripture that would back that up, but you know the word. We are the anointed of God.
Yeah.
So, is it ever right for us to take things into our hand to try to
Never.
not only get rid of, but maybe to punish someone that's of God, God's anointed? It never is. It never is. We need to not try to fix things in other people. We need to try to fix things in ourselves with God's help, but not in other people. It's never right to take things into our own hands. We must realize that God's anointed it's up to God to take care of them. It's not up to us to try to change people's hearts or change people's ways or change people. It's not up to us, it's up to God. And God can do it in a very correct and right way, but it's not up to us.
So that's why it's so important that our witness be clean.
That's right.
And
If it's the only way we're gonna have an effect on people.
And the way the Lord does it is always with love.
That's right. God's ways are always right. So he says, God forbid that I should stretch forth mine hand against the Lord's anointed. But I pray thee, he says, take now the spear that is at his bolster, at his headpiece there, and the cruse of water, and let us go. So that's what Abishai did. He took his spear and he took his water and left. Verse 12, so David took the spear and the cruse of water from Saul's bolster, and they got them away, and no man saw it, nor knew it, neither awaked, for they were all asleep. Now notice this, because a deep sleep from the Lord was fallen upon them.
Now, why did he do that?
Isn't the Lord able to take care of things?
You see, and the thing is, David didn't know that.
No, he didn't know the Lord was going to do that, and that they wouldn't wake up. I'm sure they tiptoed around.
Yes, I'm gonna say.
And why did the Lord do that? Because he had somebody like me.
Yeah. I think he
Yes.
was honoring David. David was not gonna touch Saul.
No.
And so he just enabled him to do,
The Lord was having his will,
yes.
and he was protecting his man. The Lord was in control. How much better to let the Lord take care of things. Let him do what is needed as he will, as he knows what to do. We don't always know what to do. I never will forget one time that Alfred and I, we felt that the Lord wanted us to do something, to move from a certain place, and so we moved. We didn't wait on the Lord as to the when and how and all about it, and there were problems because of that. We should have waited for the Lord. It wasn't that he wasn't wanting us to move, but he had his own timing, and he had his own way, and we didn't wait for that. We just took things into our own hand.
But you were young.
We were young, but we had to learn. Anyway, this is what David did. He waited for the Lord. And they were all asleep because the Lord put a deep sleep upon them. Then David went over, verse 13, to the other side and stood on the top of the hill afar off, a great space being between them. And David cried to the people and to Abner the son of Ner, the one that should have been protecting Saul, saying, Answerest thou not, Abner? Then Abner answered and said, Who are you that cries to the king? And David said to Abner, Are not you a valiant man? And who is like to thee in Israel? He said, You're just a great man, one of the best of Israel. And wherefore then hast thou not kept the Lord the king? For there came one of the people in to destroy the king thy Lord. So David was really getting after Abner and being, what's the word?
Facetious, that's what Alfred would say.
Okay. And sarcastic
Sarcastic
to
too.
him. Verse 16. This thing is, he's continuing to talk, this thing is not good that thou hast done. As the Lord liveth, you are worthy to die. And he was. And Saul could have had him killed because he didn't protect him. I don't think Saul did. But he says, you're worthy to die because you have not kept your master, the Lord's anointed. See, he continues to bring up the fact that Saul was the Lord's anointed. And that's why nothing should have happened to him. And now, see where the king's spear is and the cruse of water that was at his bolster. And Saul knew David's voice and said, Is this thy voice, my son David? Why does he acknowledge that David is still his son? And why did he call him his son?
Wanting to stay on his good side while he was chasing him.
Probably
And
'cause
that
he
was
could
again the truth.
Probably because he could see where it was headed.
Well, and also he's kind of responding to the mercy and love that respect that David is showing.
Yes. But I think also he's still acknowledging he was his son-in-law.
Son-in-law.
He really was his son-in-law. He was married to
Michael.
Saul's
Michael.
daughter,
Yeah.
Michael.
Whom he gave away to another man.
Yes, he did that, but that marriage was still there as far as I know. And Saul was still acknowledging that. He realized Saul had his times of being hateful and wrong, but he had his times also of realizing the Lord must be in this.
But the Lord put it right in his face.
Yes. And so Saul knew David's voice and said, Is this thy voice, my son David? And David said, It is my voice, my Lord, O king. David is still showing such honor to Saul.
Because that's because he was a man of honor.
Yes, he was a man of honor. And that is such an interesting and good thing that we can see about David. Verse 18, and he said, wherefore doth my Lord thus pursue after his servant? For what have I done, or what evil is in mine hand? So now he's calling himself Saul's servant. He says, what have I done that you are trying to kill me like you are? Verse 19, now therefore I pray thee, let my Lord the king, still yet showing honor, hear the words of his servant. If the Lord have stirred thee up against me, let him accept an offering. But if they be the children of men, cursed be they before the Lord, for they have driven me out this day from abiding in the inheritance of the Lord, saying, go serve other gods. So what he's saying here, he says, if the Lord has stirred thee up against me, if his feelings against David was of the Lord, he says, let him accept an offering. Let me send an offering to the Lord for doing something I shouldn't have done. And the Lord will accept that offering, and then that will take care of things. He won't have to continue searching for him. It says, but if they be the children of men, if there was some man that was talking bad things about David that was causing Saul to want to kill him, he says, cursed be they before the Lord. Well, then they are cursed before the Lord, and the Lord will take care of it. The Lord will judge them. It was the thinking behind it. Because he says, they've driven me out this day from abiding in the inheritance of the Lord. The inheritance of the Lord was the land of Israel that was promised to in Israel. It was promised to David and all in Israel. And he said, this shows that it was a hard thing for him to have to be running all over in the wilderness instead of enjoying what God had given them, the land that God had given them, that was their inheritance. And he said, I can't enjoy that. I'm having to run. And he says, saying, go serve other gods, he was running in places where people were not worshiping God. They were worshiping idols. And they were no doubt trying to get David to worship their gods, their idols. If you're not having a good time here, worship our idols and they'll give you a good time. They'll help you. Well, David was having to deal with all kinds of things like that, I'm sure, in the way he was running away and telling them to go serve other gods and let other gods take care of them if his God wouldn't take care of him. So David's faith in God had to be strong for him to continue to stand in what he knew was right, even though it was going against so many things. Verse 20, now therefore let not my blood fall to the earth. Don't kill me here before the face of the Lord, for the king of Israel is come out to seek a flea, as when one doth hunt a partridge in the mountains. He says, I'm no one but just a flea that you're spending all this time, this effort, all these men you've brought to kill a flea. And then he compared himself to a partridge. And a partridge was a tame bird, and it was one that wouldn't do anything to really protect themselves. If someone was coming to kill them, they didn't have a hard time killing them because they were just there waiting.
I have to go. I got a text and I got to.
Okay. Glad you could come for a while.
Let us know about Ralph.
I will. I'll text you.
Okay.
Yeah. So David compared himself not to a flea or a partridge that wouldn't do anything to try to save himself. Verse 21, then said Saul, I have sinned. Return, my son David, for I will no more do thee harm, because my soul was precious in thine eyes this day. Behold, I have played the fool, and I have erred exceedingly. So, once again, Saul is accepting the fact that he was doing wrong and trying to kill David and was running after him. And he told David, he says, I have done wrong in this, I have sinned. And he says, you return now, and I will do thee no harm. Saul, this is one of the things that shows me that Saul was a Christian. He had accepted the Lord a long time ago, but he was still, the Lord was still in him, the Lord was still dealing with him, because this is the second time that he has asked for forgiveness and backed off from following David and trying to kill him. And David answered and said, behold the king's spear, and let one of the young men come over and fetch it. So David is giving it back to him. He's accepting his apology here. And he says, the Lord render to every man his righteousness and his faithfulness. For the Lord delivered thee into my hand today, but I would not stretch forth mine hand against the Lord's anointed. He would not go ahead and kill Saul because of his trust in the Lord. And so he accepted Saul's apology. He didn't go ahead and try to kill him. And he says in verse 24, behold, as thy life was much set by this day in mine eyes, so let my life be much set by in the eyes of the Lord, and let him deliver me out of all tribulation. He's accepting these things from the Lord, that the Lord had been doing these things, and he was letting Saul go. Then Saul said to David, blessed be thou, my son David. See, this is the third time he's calling him his son. He's accepting him. Thou shalt both do great things, and also shalt prevail. Saul accepted the fact that David was a man of God. And because of that, he says, you're going to do great things, and you're going to prevail. He knew in his heart that David was going to be the king. He knew that God had anointed him as king, and that was going to come to pass. And so he realized that he had been doing wrong, and he let him go. So David went on his way, and Saul returned to his place. But it doesn't say that David went back to his home. He didn't, because he still didn't trust Saul. He knew the fickleness of man's thinking, and this was man's thinking with Saul. He realized that he had been doing wrong, and so he thought in his heart, I think he probably felt it in his heart, that he wasn't going to chase David anymore. But that didn't last very long. It didn't last. So let's go ahead in chapter 27. And David said in his heart, I shall now perish one day by the hand of Saul. There is nothing better for me than I should speedily escape into the land of the Philistines. And Saul shall despair of me to seek me any more in any coast of Israel, so shall I escape out of his hand. So what's happened to David now?
Oh, he's having a little trust issue here.
He has a trust issue. He was real strong in believing God and in waiting on God, letting God take care of things. But now he says, I'm just going to, one of these days, Saul's going to get me. He's going to come back and look for me again. And he's going to find me, and he's going to kill me if I stay in this country. He says, let's just go to another country. Let's go to where the Philistines are, because Saul won't come over there. And then I won't have to keep running away and be, all upset all the time. I can live a regular life. David's faith was failing. Has that ever come to us?
Oh, yeah.
It does, to each one. There comes a time when the Lord will continue testing and trying us, and our faith will fail. And so we won't do what we should have done. And so does the Lord just let us go and not work with us anymore? Aren't you glad he doesn't? And I know David was glad that the Lord didn't do that to him. But here, this is one of David's, my Bible
Low
says,
times.
his lapse of faith. And so he went to the Philistines. Verse 2, and David arose and he passed over with 600 men that were with him. At this time he had 600 following him. He went to Achish, the son of Maoch, king of Gath. And this was in the land of the Philistines. And David dwelt with Achish of Gath, he and his men, every man with his household, even David and his 2 wives, Ahinoam the Jezreelitess and Abigail the Carmelitess, Nabal's wife. So they took their home, their wives, their children, their whatever they had at home. They took them and they went to stay in the land of the Philistines so they wouldn't have to keep running. Naturally, you can understand they're doing this. They wanted to just live a normal life and not have to be worried all the time of being killed and not have to keep running. Verse 5, and David said unto Achish, if I have now found grace in thine eyes, let them give me a place in some town in the country, that I may dwell there. For why should my servant dwell in the royal city with thee? He had, verse 6, then Achish gave him Ziklag that day, wherefore Ziklag pertaineth unto the king of Judah unto this day. And so he had gone to Gath, where Achish lived, and that was like the capital city of that area. But David then said, he went to Achish, the king there, and said, I shouldn't be living in this area, in the king's city. He says, give me a town somewhere in the country where I can live. Well, David was being wise naturally here. We don't see that he's asking the Lord what to do even yet, but he's realizing that he needs to be away from the king of that country. So at that time David dwelt in the country of the Philistines, was a full year and 4 months. And David and his men went up and invaded the Geshurites and the Gizites and the Amalekites, for those nations were of old the inhabitants of the land, as thou goest to Shur, even into the land of Egypt. So he's dwelling in his own place now, Ziklag. It's away from the place of the king, and he went to these 3 countries and warred against them. Verse 9, and David smote the land and left neither man nor woman alive, and took away the sheep and the oxen and the asses and the camels and the apparel, and returned and came to Achish. So he invaded these 3 countries and took everything they had. He killed all the men and the women. Why did he do that? Why did he kill all the men and the women?
Well, back in the day when I read this, I thought he was just mad, upset. And then I thought, well, he did that to save his own soul. I went through a bunch of things, right? Because I thought, why in the world did he do that?
It says tells us in verse 11.
So that they couldn't,
David
Tell on
saved
him.
neither man nor woman alive.
no witness.
But why did he do that in the first place?
Yeah, why would Achish care?
Well, Achish would care because that's his
They're
land,
Philistines.
His
and
domain.
it was
Oh, then
that
that's
belonged to him.
That's why he didn't want anybody telling him.
He was hungry.
So
He
he
needed-
killed it for himself.
Yeah, but
He needed something where they could live by. He was there and he didn't have any food. He didn't have anything. So he got all of his food and everything he needed from these countries.
Well, in 10, Achish said, whither have you made a road today?
Yeah, Achish asked him.
But he lied.
But I believe that that's why he it conquered them, so he got the sheep, he got the donkeys, he got the camels, and he got apparel. They needed clothes, and he got whatever he needed to start living a normal life.
And he got the Jeremites and against the south of the Kenites.
Mhm. He got what he needed for them to begin living a normal life, but he couldn't let the Achish, the king in the Philistines there, know what he was doing. So that's why he killed all the people, even the men and the women, so that there would be no one telling the king what he had done.
Which king? The king of this area?
Yes,
Achish.
Achish.
yes.
So notice said, and Achish said, then he returned and came to Achish.
Verse 10.
Verse 10 now. Achish said, whither have you made a road today? And David said, against the south of Judah and against the south of the Jeremites, and against the south of the Kenites. Was that true?
No,
No.
so he's lying.
So whenever we do things in our own way,
Just make it up.
You have to hide your tracks.
we have to keep sinning. We were sinning by making things in our own way. Karen?
Down here, 1 Samuel 15:8, the Amalekites is where Saul kept the king, and this is what David was taking care of the Amalekites and getting rid of them, which Saul didn't do.
Okay.
So,
So anyway, David saved neither man nor woman alive, verse 11, to bring tidings to Gath. He didn't want them talking, saying, lest they should tell on us, saying, so did David, and so will be his manner all the while he dwelleth in the country of the Philistines. He didn't want the people telling on and saying that's what he was going to keep doing. He wanted to keep living there without people not trusting him. And Achish believed David, saying, he hath made his people Israel utterly to abhor him. Therefore he shall be my servant forever. So it worked as far as all outward things go.
Now, is Achish the king there?
Achish is the king, yes.
So he believed everything David said.
He believed David. But David, in doing that, I put here, David was not honest with Achish as to whom he had raided that day, but Achish had believed him and was satisfied, saying, he made his people Israel to utterly abhor and will be my servant forever. But I put up here what happened to David.
Are you past 28 yet, or are you in 28?
No, didn't start at 28.
No, I'm not in 28. But for David to do this, what this did, it caused, first of all, it caused him not to become the king, because it wasn't too long after this that Saul died, and then David was made king.
He went home.
Yes, after Saul died. But this caused him not to be able to be the king right away, because he had to work all of these things out and stay and get things taken care of and so on. He couldn't be king right away. Then it caused a division in Israel because they didn't accept David. All of them didn't accept David as king right away. So he was king over part of Israel, and over part he wasn't. And there was something else that caused him not to. Well, I've got it some here. You can see when you are reading this.
You mean after into verse 28? Is that what you mean?
No, not 28. No, I didn't go into chapter 28.
Well, you were gonna go back into,
No,
27?
she's just finished chapter 27.
oh, right.
Yeah,
Mm,
at verse 12, that's the last 27.
Well, you'll see it, because it's in here somewhere.
So kind of what this did then, it made the Philistines think that David's on their side,
Yes,
but the rumors had to get out to Israel that this is what the Philistines were saying, so now Israel is thinking David's an enemy now, too.
yeah,
So he really did kind of hang his own neck because
he did. Mhm.
now Israel can't accept him or trust him yet.
Yeah, Israel doesn't trust him.
Oh,
Because it had to get out from the Philistines that David's on our side.
Yeah,
He's been doing what we want.
and so what do they think in chapter 28?
We'll have to read it.
no, I haven't
Oh,
gone
well,
in,
yeah, I've been in 28.
no, I
Not
haven't.
yet. She'll be ready for next week.
Yeah. I've got down here, and I don't see it now, but anyway, you'll see it as you read it, that there was 3 things that went completely wrong for David because he did this,
Oh,
because he took things into his own hands. So, but anyway, the lesson for us is don't take things into our own hand. Wait and let God
Yeah,
make the
That's
moves.
what I always thought, but boy, to me today, it sounded like, whoa, he took over.
Let God take over in our
it's
lives.
interesting that he fails like this after such a beautiful
Yes,
victory.
Yeah.
he had a
Right
one,
after that,
After such beautiful,
victory. I
Victory.
mean, he didn't kill Saul and he showed
Yeah.
respect and love
Yeah.
and then he has to, now I'll go take care of
well, I
himself.
sure got mixed up because I thought he won.
But you know, that's sometimes,
That happens, huh?
yeah, when, yeah.
Great victory and then
sometimes we can
kaboom.
have a great victory
Mhm.
and we think everything's wonderful, and then something will happen and we'll fail completely. But God still loves
He
us.
does.
He's,
Because what?
But God still loves us.
God.
But when we fail, it's because we've gotten too big for our britches.
Oh, yes, and the Lord knows that, so he knows how to take us down.
It splits the britches.
You want to take care of that.
You.
So, next week, the Lord willing, we'll go ahead into 28.